Hello everyone. So today's video is on ulna. Ulna is the medial bone of the forearm and its size diminishes from this upper end to the lower end. This is the upper end which has a concave notch and the lower end is smaller, and the lower end has this process, the sharp process known as the styloid process, and it has the shaft which has surfaces and borders, and one border, that is the lateral border, is the sharpest and is known as the introitious border. So how will you determine the site? The upper end is expanded and has a hook like projection. The hook like projection is known as the trochlear notch, and the concavity is facing forwards, and the lower end is smaller and has a small rounded head here. The styloid process projects downwards and from the posterior medial aspect of the head. Now coming to the upper end, let's discuss the upper end first. The upper end has two processes, the olecranon process and the coronoid process. This is the coronoid process. Two articular surface, that is the trochlear and the radial. This radial articular surface articulates with the radial head. Now coming to the olecranon process, which projects upwards and forms the uppermost part of the ulna. It is a beak shaped projection. It occupies the olecranon fossa of the humerus, and it possesses six surfaces: the anterior surface, the posterior surface, the lateral surface, and the medial surface. So the anterior surface forms the upper part of the trochlear notch, and it is a concave. So the posterior surface is triangular. The posterior surface is triangular, and it is the subcutaneous part of the bone. It presents a triangular non-articular area, the apex of which is downwards. Now coming to the medial surface, the medial surface is continuous with the posterior surface of the shaft, and flexor digitorum profundus arises from its lower part, and flexor carpi ulnaris arises from the rough elevation in its upper part. Next, the superior surface, it is rough and it is separated from the anterior surface by a sharp margin. The triceps brachii is inserted into the posterior two-thirds of this surface. Now the coronoid process. The coronoid process is shelf-like. So it has four surfaces: the upper surface, which forms the trochlear notch; the anterior surface, which is triangular, and there you will find the insertion of the brachialis muscle. The lateral surface forms the radial notch. The lateral surface forms the radial notch, and there is supinator crest, which is sharp crest behind the hollow, that is the hollow part of the tuberosity. Supinator arises from the crest and the triangular depression in front of it. So coming to the medial surface, which is concave, and the flexor digitorum profundus arises from this surface. Next are the borders. The medial border is sharp in character, and the flexor digitorum superficialis arises from the lower part, and also the ulnar collateral ligament. The pollinator teres muscle from the medial border below the tubercle is found, and occasional head of flexor pollicis longus may arise from this border also. So coming to the notches, these are the trochlear notch, which articulates with the trochlea of the humerus; the radial notch, which articulates with the head of the radius. Now coming to the shaft is a triangular in cross section. It has three borders: the introitious border, which is the sharpest, the anterior border, and the posterior border. and these form the three surfaces, that is the anterior, the medial and the posterior surface. Now coming to the interosseous surface, which is the sharpest, here the interosseous membrane is attached, and the anterior border, here the flexor digitorum profundus arises from the upper 3/4, and the posterior border which is subcutaneous throughout of its extent. It gives attachment to three muscle, that is the flexor carpi ulnaris, extensor carpi ulnaris and flexor digitorum profundus. Coming to the surfaces, the anterior surface which has flexor digitorum profundus arising in the upper 3/4 of the part, and the pointer quadratus arises from the lower 1/4 of this surface. And the medial surface which is convex, the flexor digitorum profundus arises from the upper 3/4 of this part. And the posterior surface, where the adductor pollicis longus arising from the upper 4th part, the extensor pollicis longus from the 2nd 4th, and the extensor indicis from the 3rd 4th part. Now coming to the lower end, it has head and the styloid process. The anterior part and the posterior margin of the head gives attachment to the capsular ligament. Now the styloid process is a short rounded process. You see this is the styloid process which directs downwards. The tip is palpable, and the posterior medial part of the wrist, it is in the posterior middle part, and it lies 1.25 centimeter above the level of the tip of the styloid process of radius. So the tip gives attachment to a ligament, that is the ulnar collateral ligament of the wrist joint. The posterior surface gives attachment to the extensor retinaculum. So this is the ulna. It has three parts: upper, shaft, the lower. How to determine the side? This is the interosseous border, which is faced laterally, and this is a medial bone. So it is a bone of my left hand. This is the radial notch which faces laterally. This is the ulna.